Here, another different focus with sculpting in Mudbox, and that is the use of traditional clay approaches. So let's, okay. I'm just going to open up this scene here. So with Mudbox, the important thing to note is that we're not confined to any kind of digital workflow. The nice thing about Mudbox is it's tactile, it's very hands-on, and you can work with it in a traditional clay sculpting approach. The benefits, of course, being the iterations stored in layers, as well as the ability to undo, which is nice, and you're not going to have this thing dry out on you. And of course, we can test different materials and render some visualizations of it in here as well. So once again, if we just switch to our top view in here, we can just start working with some different overall sculpting forms. Just get some base shape worked out here. I'm going to turn on mirroring actually for this. And we can just start to work in some quick kind of loose shapes to a vehicle body here. We'll work in the side view here. So I'm working on very low-res geometry here, just a low-res base to just start to kind of work with some overall forms on this. Let's see if we can start to change the shape quite rapidly here just with a simple grab brush. And then using the grab silhouette is going to ensure that right across the geometry I'm going to get that clean sculpting that's going to be the same throughout or right across. And if we step up let's jump back in perspective, and we can start to subdivide that, step up some levels of subdivision. And as we're working here, we can use our smooth brush to start to smooth out some of these areas here on the geometry. I'm going to step up another level of subdivision, and we'll take a look at the use of simple traditional design curves with Mudbox, much like you would work with clay as well. So I'm just going to smooth out some of this geometry here. There we go. And if we take the sculpt brush, for example, and I'll go back into my image browser here, I have a nice little folder of traditional kind of design curves and some custom-made curves in here as well. If we take a curve like this, for example, and just throw it in as a stencil into the viewport, leave our mirroring on, we can use this to as a template for sculpting. So I'm going to turn that strength down and brush size down, and just start to rub the geometry along the edge of that that curve. So you can see that as I sculpted that, I'm going to turn off the steady stroke actually, so we don't need it for using a nice curve here. So you can see that we can start to get these overall results, and then with the Shift key we can access our smooth brush to get in there, start to be able to blend that down. And of course with the layer, it's a little too much. We can blend that down. The nice thing about the layers in Mudbox, I can go into the negative on it, give a nice overall negative view, or a negative effect. Oops. I'm going to put a whole new layer down there. So you can see as I'm working here, I'm always putting down new layers. And then, of course, we can turn on things like ambient occlusion as we work. And let's just step up and reveal So we can just start to reveal some of these. Oh, so hang on a second here. So this here is a concept that was just using low-res geometry as we're going here and just starting to rough in or block in the form, not caring about if it's smooth or anything, just trying to get an overall silhouette or a shape, a very kind of curved structure. If we just step up in here, we can see we can start to form in some of the overall details of the windshield and the front end details on this. And then stepping up again, we start to refine it a little bit further. Now we have high enough resolution of geometry that I can smooth this out and start to use the pinch tool to grab these kind of sharp edges along the side, and then start to dig these kind of inlets or holes along the side. Let's step up to the top level here where you can see that we have some more kind of finished detail. And the nice thing is right live within Mudbox, we can start to play with some different materials in here. So let's take, for example, a reflective white material on here. I'm going to edit that material. We'll I'm going to give this actually so we can start to play with things like the reflective strength, and then start to bring in different little reflective maps. We can use some HDR lighting to start to preview what we're looking at, to see how our forms work with the overall color of the material that we're placing on the car. And then if we jump back into, you can see some other concept sculpts here. Quickly realize just by sculpting up using the grab brush, some wax tools to build up some areas, and then pinch to sharpen any hard edge details. And then just some clay sculpt renders here of that car that we were just looking at. And then checking out materials with reflections live in Mudbox here. And then just dialing in materials and overall specularity and reflections so that we can see the overall result on this car as we work. Let's place maybe add a different reflection map on here. Turn the tone mapper on a bit. So with that reflection map, I'm just hitting the L hotkey, which allows me to adjust that in the viewport with the lighting setup. It'll automatically map that reflection light to the first top light. So I can start to rotate that around to kind of get some different kind of viewport effects on the surface of the car. And then any of these little renders here are created with the render menu, which we're going to jump into some of this here in a bit, where we can do render passes as well. And that's just saving out screen images where you have alpha or transparency generated for you. So with Mudbox being hands-on and kind of a tactile approach, you can use these. You can see how I was using just a simple stencil there to be able to grab those curves and start to quickly work with them. And using some nibs, like stamps as tool nibs, to customize the edge of a sculpting tool. And then rubbing stencils, of course, for textured surface effects. And then using layers to store iterations or variations of form. Like in that car file there, there's a couple different variations of body styles stored in the same file. And now we'll take a look at some use of Mudbox for some interior car visualizations. I'm actually going to do a new scene just to kill off any of my lighting setup. So I'm just going to open up this car interior here. And the interesting thing about the car interior is that we're able to use a different variety of resolution of texture maps. So we can use Mudbox to be able to quickly visualize different materials in context to a car interior. So this is just a simple car interior where we can change fabrics and things like different materials on the fly. And then, of course, generate rendered images out of there as well. We can sculpt and paint with it while we're using any of the viewport filters to get any kind of higher-end rendering effects. So we'll just turn on that tone mapper there. And I have some camera bookmarks here that we can store where we can just store some different views or different variations of for our car. Then when we come in here, we can visualize all these different materials. We can change them on the fly. With this viewport filter here, this tone mapper, I'm just going to lock that in by bringing everything down to 0. There we go. So we can start to visualize these different kind of materials, different carpet swatches, or different fabric materials here. Again, with the library of interior kind of textures I have here, I've got a library of fabrics that are from actual car manufacturers. So we can start to preview all these different textures, different seat textures, different carpets, for example, just by rubbing them in onto the seat. So if we were to take this leather in here, we could begin to change our simple little car seat here. So I'm just going to take the projection brush and work with this seat here. If we wanted to create a new layer to, for example, try out a simple leather effect, we can do that. We can bring in the just reset the stencil here. Okay, there we go. I have a bump map on here as well that's built from the other material. And then as I'm painting here, we have a lot of objects, a lot of different texture maps going on here. I can just quickly isolate any specific area that I want to work with. And then, of course, in the object list, I can dive in and sort through all the different objects here. So the different pieces of engineering are in here, like the actual frame structure. And then another interesting way to work with this is if we want to work with this dashboard, for example, and this frame, and isolate out that dashboard and bring the frame in and then actually freeze a portion of the dashboard to the frame. You can find the frame in here. I'm just going to put all of it on here. I'll just leave it all in here, and I'm just going to quickly freeze out an area so that I can sculpt it up. So this dashboard here, I'll just throw down a sculpt layer. And then if we want to lock this area so that we're not disturbing that as it is locked into that frame, you can just quickly freeze that. So the blue just represents any kind of frozen area that so we're not disturbing it. Take the grab brush here, and we can just maybe deform the overall look of the dash while we work. And you'll see the textures as I'm tumbling around, the textures are baking in, or you'll see them actually kind of come right into view here. That's the Gigatextile engine in Mudbox. It's available now in the Subscription Advantage Pack, which is brand new. Most of the stuff that I'm doing in here you can do in Mudbox 2012. The Subscription Advantage Pack, though, does give you this more powerful texture painting workflow so that you can kind of push the limits of it a bit anyways. You can get much higher resolution detail. And the Gigatextile engine actually gives you a level of detail workflow while you're working. Anyways, the point is we can have some nice high-res texture detail in here, but be able to actually work in conjunction with the in context to the actual structure of the frame engineering, and be able to change anything here on the fly and be able to change any materials or paint up any materials if we wanted to. Okay. And jump into there's just some images there of that car, just lighting and textures and shadowing and things like that right out of Mudbox viewport. So let's take a look at another use here of Mudbox where just do something quick here with some stencils. Okay, so with this here, I'm going to turn that off. So once again, with this gas tank here, if we wanted to be able to change this or get a bunch of different iterations of this, a bunch of different versions of it, we can essentially lock that to the frame. So we have the frame in here as kind of a structural reference, but we only want to work with that gas tank. So I can grab the frame, right-click on it, lock that off, and then take this gas tank here at the base of it, and just give it a nice, simple freeze right along that area where the gas tank rests on that frame. Get a little bit of the underside there. And again, if we start to change the shape of this gas tank overall, it's not going to affect that bottom now, which is nice. We'll just be able to pull or change any of these effects, any of these areas on the gas tank, and it's not affecting anything that we've frozen. So we can preserve that kind of engineering structure there. If there's a specific model that has to be locked in a specific way, we can certainly go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to switch to turn some mirroring on. Just smoothing out the tank here a bit. And then another nice thing here within Mudbox is the ability to work with infinite texture layers. So we'll take this projection brush here, for example. And if I jump into the image browser there, actually let's first put an interesting little material on it maybe. Maybe something like that. We start to preview some little reflections or different materials here in the viewport. If I go to the image browser here, I'm going to put some textures on and start to so here we have this interesting little gradient that we could put on. If we wanted to start to explore some different painting logos or painting effects overall on our sculpting here, on our gas tank variation here, we just bring in, I'm just going to bring in this simple gradient. And by painting this right across here, just by kind of flooding it onto the surface, I can do something interesting here where I can take, let's just grab another paint layer, go in the image browser and grab maybe these flames in here. So if we grab these this flame detail here, I've got it on a different layer. We're just going to end up with this white on black here. But the nice thing about that, what I've done there, is we can actually drag that down onto that underlying level underneath and mask out that area so you can see the paint directly underneath that. Another interesting thing with that there as well, I can adjust the color. I can use a preset in SAP 2012. There's a preset to invert the values in there. But if you just grab the overall value, you can see now that we've matted out everything around there that texture file was able to grab and wasn't able to grab. And then I'm painting on the mask right now. So if I want to mask out further any other areas, I'll just paint with black. So we're actually, if I solo that area just to see what it looks like, it's just that black and white simple area there, but I'm using that as my mask to create with here for the gas tank on here. Oops. Okay. So being able to grab all different paint layers, stack up different variety of different paint layers, and then be able to use different textures for texture visualization, logo visualization on there, and be able to use existing textures to mask out things. So to be able to just quickly place logos or different color schemes, for example, on this motorcycle here.